Hey readers, we are back again to work on our read aloud, so let's jump right in. We are reading The City of Ember, and we are currently in Chapter 7, A Message Full of Holes. And if you'll recall from yesterday's reading, Lena had invited over Captain Fleury to ask her what she thought about the message, and she learned that Captain Fleury is one of the believers who believes that the builders will come back to rescue them. So we ended with this paragraph right here, so I'm just going to reread that part before we get into our new stuff. Lena took advantage of her day off to go to the supply depot to see Lizzie Biscoe. Lizzie was quick and smart. She might have some good ideas. At the supply depot, crowds of shopkeepers stood in long, disorderly lines that stretched out the door. They pushed and jostled and snapped impatiently at each other. Lena joined them, but they seemed so frantic that they frightened her a little. They must be very sure now that the supplies are running out, she thought, and they're determined to get what they can before it's too late. When she got close to the head of the line, she heard the same conversation several times. Sorry, the clerk would say when a shopkeeper asked for 10 packets of sewing needles, or a dozen drinking glasses, or 20 packages of light bulbs. There's a severe shortage of that item. You can only have one. Or else the clerk would say, Sorry, we're out of that entirely. Forever? Forever. Lena knew that it hadn't always been this way. When Ember was a young city, the storerooms were full. They held everything the citizens could want. So much it seemed the supplies would never run out. Lena's grandmother had told her that school children were given a tour of the storerooms as part of their education. They took an elevator from the street level to a long, curving tunnel with doors on both sides and other tunnels branching off it. The guide led the tour down the long passages, opening one door after another. This area, he would say, is canned goods. Next we come to school supplies. And around this bend we have kitchenware. Next come carpentry tools. At each door the children crowded against each other to see. Every room had something different, Granny told Lena. Boxes of toothpaste in one room, bottles of cooking oil, bars of soap, boxes of pills. There were 20 rooms just for vitamin pills. One room was stacked with hundreds of cans of fruit. There was something called pineapple. I remember that one especially. What was pineapple? Asked Lena. It was yellow and sweet, said Granny with a dreamy look in her eyes. I had it 4 times before we ran out of it. But these tours had been discontinued long before Lena was born. The storerooms, people said, were no longer a pleasure to look at. Their dusty shelves stood mostly empty now. It was rumored that in some rooms nothing was left at all. A child seeing the rooms where powdered milk had been stored, or the rooms that stored bandages or socks or pins or notebooks, or, most of all, the dozens of rooms that had once held thousands of light bulbs, would not feel, as earlier generations of children had, that Ember was endlessly rich. Today's children, if they were to tour the storerooms, would feel afraid. Thinking about all this, Lena waited in the line of people at Lizzie's station. When she got to the front, she leaned forward with her elbows on the counter and whispered, Lizzie, can you meet me after you're through with work? I'll wait for you right outside the door. Lizzie nodded eagerly. At 4 o'clock, Lizzie came trotting out of the office door. Lena said to her, Will you come home with me for a minute? I want to show you something. Sure, said Lizzie, as they walked, Lizzie talked. My wrist is killing me from writing all day, she said. You have to write in the tiniest letters to save paper, so I get a terrible cramp in my wrist and my fingers. And people are so rude. Today they were worse than ever. I said to some guy, You can't have 15 cans of corn. You can only have 3. And he said, look, don't tell me that. I saw plenty of cans in the Pot Street Market just yesterday. And I said, well, that's why there aren't so many left today. And he said, don't be smart with me, Carrot Head. But what am I supposed to do? I can't make cans of corn out of thin air. They passed through Harkin Square, around the Gathering Hall, and down Roving Street, where 3 of the floodlights were out, making a cave of shadow. Lizzie, said Lena, interrupting the flow of talk, is it true about light bulbs? Is what true? That there aren't very many left? Lizzie shrugged. I don't know. They hardly ever let us go downstairs into the storerooms. All we see are the reports the carriers turn in. How many forks in room 1146, how many doorknobs in 3291, how many children's shoes in 2249. But when you see the report for the light bulb rooms, what does it say? I never get to see that one, said Lizzie. That one, and a few other ones like the vitamin report, only a few people can see. Who? Oh, the mayor, and of course old Flabface. Lena looked at her questioningly. You know, Farlow Batten, the head of the storerooms. He is so mean, Lena. You would just hate him. He counts us late if we come in even 2 minutes after 8, and he looks over our shoulders as we're writing, which is awful because he has bad breath, and he runs his finger over what we've written and says, this word is illegible, that word is illegible, these numbers are illegible. It's his favorite word, illegible. When they came to Lena Street, Lena ducked her head in the door of the yarn shop and said hello to Granny, and then they climbed the stairs to the apartment. Lizzie was talking about how hard it was to stand up all day, how it made her knees ache, how her shoes pinched her feet. She stopped talking long enough to say hello to Eveline Murdo, who was sitting by the window with Poppy on her lap, and then she began again as Lena led her into the bedroom. Lena, where were you when the big blackout came? She asked, but she went right on without waiting for an answer. I was at home, luckily, but it was scary, wasn't it? Lena nodded. She didn't want to talk about what had happened that day. I hate those blackouts, Lizzie went on. People say there are going to be more and more of them, and that someday... She stopped, frowned, and started again. Anyway, nothing bad happened to me. After that, I got up and figured out a whole new way to do my hair. It seemed to Lena that Lizzie was like a clock wound too tightly and running too fast. She'd always been a little this way, but today she was more so than ever. Her gaze skipped from one spot to another, her fingers twiddled with the edge of her skirt, with the edge of her shirt. She looked paler than usual, too. Her freckles stood out like little smudges of dirt on her nose. Lizzie, said Lena, beckoning toward the table in the corner of her room, I want to show you, but Lizzie wasn't listening. You're so lucky to be a messenger, Lena, she said. Is it fun? I wish I could have been one. I would have been so good at it. My job is so boring. Lena turned and looked at her. Isn't there anything you like about it? Lizzie pursed her lips in a tiny smile and looked sideways at Lena. There's one thing, she said. What? I can't tell you. It's a secret. Oh, said Lena. Then you shouldn't have mentioned it at all, she thought. Maybe I'll tell you someday, said Lizzie. I don't know. Well, I like my job, Lena said. But what I wanted to talk to you about was what I found yesterday. It's this. She lifted the box away and took up the piece of paper covering the patched-together document. Lizzie gave it a quick look. Is it a message someone gave you that got torn up? No, it was in our closet. Poppy was chewing on it. That's why it's torn up. But look at the writing on it. Isn't it strange? Uh-huh, said Lizzie. You know who has beautiful handwriting? Mila Bone, who works with me. You should see it. It's got curly tails on the Y's and the G's and fancy loops on the capital letters. Of course, Flabface hates it. He says it's illegible." Lena slid the piece of paper back over the pasted-down scraps. She wondered why she had thought Lizzie would be interested in what she'd found. She'd always had fun with Lizzie, but their fun was usually with games, hide-and-seek, tag, the kinds of games where you run and climb. Lizzie never had been much interested in anything that was written on paper. So Lena quietly put the document back in its place, and she sat down with Lizzie on the floor. She listened and listened until Lizzie's chatter ran down. "I'd better go," Lizzie said. "It was fun to see you, Lena. I miss you." She stood up. She fluffed her hair. "What was it you wanted to show me? Oh, yes, the fancy writing. Really nice. Lucky you to find it. Come and see me again soon, all right? I get so bored in that office." Lena made beet soup for dinner that night, and Poppy spilled hers and made a red lake on the table. Granny stared into her bowl, stirring and stirring the soup with her spoon, but she didn't eat. She didn't feel quite right, she told Lena. After a while, she wandered off to bed. Lena cleaned up the kitchen quickly. As soon as her chores were out of the way, she could get back to studying her document. She washed Poppy's clothes. She sewed on the buttons that had come off her messenger jacket. She picked up the rags and sacks and boxes and bags that Granny had tossed out of the closet. And by the time she had done all this and put Poppy to bed, she still had almost half an hour to study the fragments of paper. She sat down at her desk and uncovered the document. With her elbows on either side of it and her chin resting in her hands, she pored over it. Though Lizzie and Captain Fleary had paid it no attention, Lena still thought this torn-up page must be important. Why else would it have been in such a cleverly fastened box? Maybe she should show it to the mayor, she thought reluctantly. She didn't like the mayor. She didn't trust him either. But if this document was important to the future of the city, he was the one who should know about it. Of course, she couldn't ask the mayor to come to her house. She pictured him puffing up the stairs, squeezing through the door, looking disapprovingly at the clutter in their house, recoiling from Poppy's sticky hands. No, it wouldn't do. But she didn't want to take her carefully patched-together document to the gathering hall either. It was just too fragile. The best thing to do, she decided, was to write the mayor a note. She settled down to do this. She found a fairly unspoiled half piece of paper and, using a plain pencil, she wasn't going to waste her colored ones on the mayor, she wrote, "Dear Mayor Cole, I have discovered a document that was in the closet. It is instructions for something. I believe it is important because it was written in very old printing. Unfortunately, it got chewed up by my sister, so it is not all there. But you can still read some bits of it, such as marked with E, find door of bow, small steel pan. I will show you this document if you want to see it. Sincerely yours, Lena Mayfleet, Messenger, 34 Quilliam Square." She folded the note in half and wrote Mayor Cole on the front. On her way to work the next morning, she took it to the gathering hall. No one was sitting at the guard's desk, so Lena left the note there, placed so that the guard would see it when he arrived. Then, feeling that she had done her duty, she went off to her station. Several days went by. The messages Lena carried were full of worry and fear. "Do you have any extra baby drink? I can't find it at the store. Have you heard what they're saying about the generator? We can't come tonight. Grandpa B won't get out of bed." Every day when she got home from work, Lena asked Granny, "Did a message come for me?" But there was nothing. Maybe the mayor hadn't gotten her note. Maybe he'd gotten it and paid no attention. After a week, Lena decided she was tired of waiting. If the mayor wasn't interested in what she'd found, too bad for him. She was interested. She would figure it out herself. Twice during the week, when Poppy and Granny were both asleep, she'd had a little free time. She'd spent this time making a copy of the document in case anything happened to the fragile original. It had taken her a long time. She used one of her few remaining pieces of paper, an old label slightly torn from a can of peas. The copy was as accurate as she could make it, with the missing bits between the letters carefully indicated as dashes. She had tucked it under the mattress of her bed for safekeeping. Now she finally had a whole free evening. Poppy and Granny were both asleep, and the apartment was tidy. Lena sat down at her table and uncovered the patched-together document. She tied back her hair so it wouldn't keep falling in her face, and she put a piece of paper next to her, blank except for a little bit of Poppy's scribbling, to write down what she decoded. She started with the title. The first word she'd already figured out. It had to be instructions. The next word could be for. Then came egress. She wasn't sure about that. Maybe it was someone's name. Egressman? Egresston? Instructions for Egresston, she decided to call it, the instructions for short. She went on to the first line. This office doc probably meant this official document. Maybe secure meant secure or security. Then there were the words period and ears and city. But after that, so much was missing. She studied the line next to the number 1. Exp. That could be expect or expert or so many things. She moved on to riv. That might be part of a word like drive or strive. What could ip and orc possibly be? They were so close together, maybe they were part of one word. What ended with ip? Whip, Lena thought. Trip, slip. What ended with orc? Fork came to mind immediately. Trip fork, slip fork. Nothing she could think of made sense. Maybe it wasn't fork. What else ended in orc? Starting at the beginning of the alphabet, Lena went through all the words that rhymed with fork. Most of them were nonsense. Bork, dork, gork, hork, jork. This isn't going to work, she thought miserably. Oh, work. The word could be work. Then what would the first part be? Trip work? Flip work? But maybe there was a letter between the P and the W. Dips work? Pips work? Suddenly it came to her. Pipeworks. Pipeworks! That had to be it. Something in this message was about the pipeworks. Lena looked back at exp and riv. Riv! That could be river. Rapidly she ran her eyes down the page. In line 3, she saw iverb ink. That looked like riverbank. The word door jumped out at her from line 4, whole on its scrap of paper. Lena took a quick breath. A door. What if it was the one she'd wished for, the one that led to the other city? Maybe her city was real after all, and these were instructions for finding it. She wanted to leap from her chair and shout. The message had something to do with the river, a door, and the pipeworks. And who did she know who knew about the pipeworks? Dune, of course. She pictured his thin, serious face and his eyes looking out searchingly from beneath his dark eyebrows. She pictured how he used to bend over his work at school, holding his pencil in a hard grip, and how, during free time, he was usually off by himself in a corner studying a moth or a worm or a taken-apart clock. That was one thing, at least, that she liked about Dune. He was curious. He paid attention to things, and he cared about things too. She remembered how he'd been on assignment day, so furious at the mayor, so eager to trade his good job for her bad one so he could help save the city. And he'd taken Poppy inside his father's shop on the day of the blackout so she wouldn't be afraid. Why had she stopped being friends with Dune? She vaguely recalled the incident of the light pole. It seemed silly now, and long ago. The more she thought about Dune, the more it seemed he was the very person, the only person, who might be interested in what she had found. She placed the plain sheet of paper over the instructions and put the box on top. I'll go and find Dune, she thought. Tomorrow was Thursday, their day off. She would find him tomorrow and ask for his help. All right, readers, that is the end of Chapter 7. So be sure to go back into Canvas to answer your discussion question for the day, and have a great weekend.